The humid morning air above the Solomon Islands carried a sound that shouldn't have been there. Metal groaned against wind. Engines coughed and wheezed through damaged cylinders. Black smoke poured from what had once been a proud Japanese bomber. Wings trembled like wounded wings of some great bird. Inside that falling aircraft sat the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor. The naval genius whose name struck fear into American hearts across the Pacific. The bomber carved a violent path through the jungle canopy. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Fire erupted on impact. The earth shuddered from the crash. Within moments, the admiral who had reshaped naval warfare lay dead among the wreckage. This wasn't some random wartime tragedy. Every detail had been calculated. Every minute planned across thousands of ocean miles. American pilots had awakened in darkness that morning. They carried orders that would echo through history. Find Yamamoto. Destroy him. The tale of how America cracked Japan's most guarded secrets runs deeper than any thriller. How code breakers penetrated the enemy's communications. How young fighter pilots defied impossible distances to complete their deadly mission. How 21 minutes of aerial combat changed the Pacific War forever. This story begins not with explosions, but with whispers, with broken codes and desperate gambles, with one man whose brilliance both saved and doomed his nation. Long before his name became synonymous with infamy, Isoroku Yamamoto walked Harvard's campus as a student. He strolled Washington's streets as an observer. He witnessed American industrial power firsthand. Unlike his colleagues back in Tokyo, he grasped the sleeping giant's true strength. America's factories stretched beyond horizons. Oil flowed in rivers. Steel mills glowed red through endless nights. Yamamoto understood what war with such a nation would mean. His warnings fell on deaf ears. Japanese leaders dreamed of empire. They spoke of destiny and divine wind. They believed spirit could overcome steel. Yamamoto knew better. He predicted Japan could run wild for 6 months, maybe a year. After that, the avalanche would come. Yet when orders arrived to plan Pearl Harbor, duty left no choice. The Imperial Navy demanded obedience. Personal doubts meant nothing against the Emperor's will. Behind Japan's strategy lay an ancient concept, Kantai Kessen, the decisive battle. Naval commanders had spent decades preparing for one massive clash, one fight that would settle the Pacific's fate. Battleships grew into floating fortresses. Aircraft carriers joined reluctantly. Everything focused on delivering that knockout punch. Pearl Harbor represented that doctrine's first swing. The strike was meant to cripple America before it could fully awaken. But carriers escaped the harbor that December morning. From that partial failure, disaster would eventually bloom. Guadalcanal became Japan's graveyard by 1943. Thousands of soldiers vanished into jungle mud. Strategic airfields changed hands. Supply convoys burned under relentless American air attacks. Yamamoto found himself commanding a defensive war. The architect of early victories now fought to hold scattered island bases. Yet newspapers still painted him as invincible, a steel-willed strategist who embodied naval perfection. His presence alone was propaganda. The admiral who had humbled America, who had proven Japanese superiority, who promised that imperial thunder still rolled across the waves. To ordinary Japanese citizens, Yamamoto transcended mere mortality. He represented their nation's maritime soul incarnate. Thousands of miles away, American cryptanalysts hunched over intercepted radio transmissions. Station Hypo and similar units had partially cracked Japan's naval cipher. JN-25 yielded its secrets slowly, pencil by pencil, calculation by calculation. These brilliant minds translated fragments of enemy communications. They assembled puzzles from scattered pieces. What emerged would become the Pacific War's most crucial intelligence breakthrough. April 1943 brought a decoded message that stunned American commanders. Yamamoto himself planned to tour forward bases. The transmission listed departure times, flight routes, even arrival schedules down to the minute. For America's leadership, this wasn't merely information. This was opportunity wrapped in radio waves. Before fame and hatred made his name legendary, Yamamoto was simply a boy from Niigata. Born in 1884 to a samurai family struggling with Japan's rapid changes. Feudal traditions crumbled around them. The Navy raced to match Western power. Young Yamamoto entered Etajima Naval Academy carrying duty rather than privilege. Even as a cadet, he stood apart from his classmates. Disciplined, quietly brilliant, as if ocean currents already flowed through his veins. War came early for him. The 1905 Battle of Tsushima saw him serving aboard the cruiser Nishin. Thunder and flame erupted as Japan's fleet destroyed Russia's naval power. Yamamoto emerged scarred by enemy shellfire. 2 fingers lost to battle. Those missing digits became his badge of honor. The admiral whose body bore war's permanent marks. His education continued at Harvard University. There, Yamamoto absorbed America's true scope. He marveled at industrial vastness, endless petroleum reserves, steel production that never seemed to rest. He traveled coast to coast, observing railroad networks and manufacturing centers. The confidence of a nation that never doubted its own strength. These observations carved deep convictions into his mind. Japan could never match such resources in prolonged conflict. Back in Tokyo, few wanted to hear such warnings. The Imperial Navy sought prestige and dominance above all else. Yamamoto rose through ranks as both insider and outsider, admired for brilliance. Distrusted for uncomfortable honesty, he opposed alliances with Germany and Italy. Such partnerships would drag Japan into conflicts too vast to win. Still, loyalty to the emperor left no room for rebellion. He would fight not from bloodlust, but from duty's demands. By the late 1930s, Japanese ambitions had turned violent. Manchuria fell. China bled under occupation. The empire expanded through force alone. Yamamoto guided a navy intoxicated by victories. Yet cold realism never left him. When pressed about potential war with America, his answer carried brutal clarity. 6 months of guaranteed success. After that, an avalanche of American industrial might would bury them. Both prophecy and warning flowed from a man who saw farther than his contemporaries. Paradox defined his career's final chapter. Despite personal doubts, Yamamoto designed the very attack that brought America into the war. Pearl Harbor bore his strategic fingerprints. To his countrymen, he became the genius who had humbled the sleeping giant. Posters displayed his likeness. Newspapers called him the Emperor's Shield. School children memorized his achievements. For a brief moment, Yamamoto embodied Japan's pride. Their faith that spirit could overcome superior materiel. But beneath banners and celebration songs, Yamamoto knew the truth. He had triggered events beyond anyone's control. The sleeping giant was stirring. Months following Pearl Harbor deepened the strategic tension. Early victories at Malaya, Singapore, and the Philippines gave way to reversals. Coral Sea and Midway unraveled his carefully crafted plans. American resilience exceeded all projections. Still, the Japanese people looked to him as their guiding star. He became prisoner and master of his own legend, a commander trapped inside the myth his nation had woven around him. Thus, by 1943, when his aircraft lifted off from Rabaul, Yamamoto had evolved beyond simple naval officer. He had grown from wounded cadet to empire's architect, a strategist bearing both triumph's weight and looming disaster's shadow. His rise paralleled Japan's own desperate gamble, a nation reaching for glory even as war's tide turned against it. Heavy silence blanketed the South Pacific at dawn. Only distant engine hums broke the quiet as aircraft warmed on scattered airstrips. For weeks, whispers had circulated through American command structure. A decoded message promised something unprecedented. Exact timing, precise location, specific aircraft carrying Japan's most celebrated admiral. The decision came swiftly. The mission would be dangerous beyond measure, but it had to be attempted. Distance presented the primary challenge. Yamamoto's inspection flight to Bougainville would carry him through skies over 400 miles from the nearest American base. Only one Allied aircraft possessed the necessary speed, range, and firepower for such an intercept: the twin-engine P-38 Lightning. Sleek and menacing with its distinctive twin booms flanking a central cockpit, the Lightning appeared forged from its namesake element. Even so, extra fuel tanks would be essential for the round trip. 18 men were selected from veteran squadrons. Their orders were deceptively simple. Their burden was immense beyond words. 4 pilots would be designated as hunters. Their sole mission was diving upon the enemy bombers. The remainder would climb high, circling like predatory birds, to engage the Zero escort fighters, certain to swarm in defense. Every pilot understood the stakes completely. Success might alter the war's momentum. Failure would mean death in the Pacific's depths. Planning unfolded under absolute secrecy. Maps spread beneath dim electric lights. Calculations sketched with nervous pencil strokes. They needed to intersect Yamamoto's flight at one precise minute in one specific patch of sky. Too early meant missing the target entirely. Too late meant flying into prepared ambush. Mathematics allowed zero margin for error. Navigation became a razor's edge between success and disaster. As preparations intensified, the mission's human weight pressed down upon chosen pilots. Quick letters were written and tucked into footlockers, just in case they never returned home. Some men smoked in contemplative silence, eyes fixed on distant horizons. Others attempted jokes, their laughter brittle in the humid tropical air. They were young men carrying history's gravity on their shoulders. None could escape one terrible thought. They were being sent to assassinate rather than simply fight. Meanwhile, across thousands of ocean miles, Yamamoto prepared for his own journey. Meticulous by nature and habit, he demanded strict adherence to timetables. Schedules maintained down to the minute. He believed in military discipline, in proper appearances. He had no idea his precision would become his betrayal. Rising sun illuminated Rabaul as his staff prepared 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. Their aluminum frames appeared fragile against the vast sky's backdrop. 6 Zero fighters would rise alongside the bombers. Their duty was crystal clear: protect the Admiral's life at any cost. When the appointed hour arrived, both sides lifted from Earth almost simultaneously. The Betty bombers droned southward, with engines running steady. Yamamoto rode inside what he believed was routine inspection travel. From Guadalcanal, P-38s roared into morning air, climbing eastward before swinging north across empty ocean. The Americans skimmed just above wavetops to avoid radar detection. Salt spray lashed their windscreens. Eyes remained fixed on instruments counting down toward destiny. Hours passed in engine-thrumming silence. Each pilot remained alone with private thoughts. Every heartbeat synchronized with Lightning's mechanical rhythm. Sweat soaked through flight suits despite the altitude's chill. Ahead lay Bougainville's thin green line, shrouded in morning mist. They knew somewhere beyond that veil, Yamamoto's aircraft cut through sky with clockwork punctuality, unaware that hunters already waited along his path. The stage was finally set, two flights converging upon identical airspace, one led by Japan's most famous admiral, confident in his schedule's reliability, the other commanded by American pilots who had wagered everything on secrecy, mathematics, and willingness to strike without mercy. The path to battle bore no drums or banners, only quiet propeller beats and fate's slow, tightening grip. Clear morning air stretched above Bougainville's jungle canopy. The kind of endless sky painted in soft blues, broken only by mist rising from vegetation below. It was 9:34 a.m. when American pilots spotted them. Two dark shapes followed by sleek escort fighter silhouettes cutting across the horizon. Precisely when intelligence had promised they would appear. The trap was sprung. Prey had arrived exactly on schedule. Lieutenant Rex Barber gripped his control yoke tighter. His heart hammered against engine roar as he and his wingmen adjusted course. Betty bombers glided forward, completely unaware of lightning about to strike. 6 Zeros flew high above and behind in protective formation. Sharp-eyed guardians ready to pounce on any threat. For several frozen seconds, the Pacific held its collective breath. Then Americans dove from altitude. Lightning twin engines howled as Barber and Major Thomas Lanphier broke formation. They streaked downward like falling spears. Sunlight glinted off polished silver wings. The Japanese formation reacted too late. Urgent shouts crackled over radio frequencies. Zeros twisted desperately to intercept, but already the sky blazed with tracer fire. One Betty bomber jolted as bullets tore through its aluminum fuselage. Glass shattered into crystalline fragments. Metal screamed under the assault. Flames licked along the aircraft's side. Crewmen inside scrambled frantically, fighting useless controls as their bomber dipped violently toward the jungle below. But Yamamoto's plane maintained steady flight. Its engines pounded a rhythm of mechanical defiance. For the attacking Americans, there could be no mistaking their primary target. Barber's P-38 swung into optimal firing position. He aligned crosshairs with methodical precision. His breath came sharp and rapid. At barely 200 yards distance, he squeezed the trigger mechanism. The lightning spat streams of .50 caliber destruction. Shells hammered into the Betty's fragile aluminum skin. Engines coughed and sputtered. Smoke erupted from multiple punctures. The bomber staggered like a wounded animal, its airframe shuddering under the relentless onslaught. Witnesses later swore they saw the aircraft lurch as if mortally wounded, its nose pitched earthward at an impossible angle. Above the primary engagement, Lanphier battled Zeros weaving through chaos with guns blazing constantly. Black smoke trails scarred the perfect sky as fighters twisted in deadly aerial dance. Each pilot fought in seconds that felt like eternity stretched beyond measure. The Americans were outnumbered, but momentum carried them forward. Their mission wasn't aerial dueling. Their mission was killing. Inside Yamamoto's doomed plane, the Admiral sat in his passenger seat, wearing crisp uniform. His face remained calm and unreadable despite the chaos. He had risen before dawn that morning, insisting on military punctuality and discipline. Now his world had become thunder and flame. Bullets pierced the bomber's thin skin like paper. Engines sputtered and died. Warning alarms wailed their urgent songs. Yet Yamamoto did not cry out in fear or anger. He remained silent and composed. A man facing the fate he had long predicted would come. The giant he had awakened was finally reaching for him. The Betty's left wing burst into brilliant orange fire. Smoke poured into clear sky, trailing behind like a funeral shroud as the aircraft lost its battle against gravity. Jungle below loomed larger with each passing second. Treetops rushed upward to meet them. Crew members fought desperately against inevitable physics. But the bomber was already doomed beyond salvation. Moments later, it struck the canopy with violent, earth-shaking impact, ripping through branches and vegetation. Disintegrating in a roar of explosion and flame, witnesses from nearby villages recalled the thunderous sound, the black smoke plume rising above the forest like a monument to death. For Japanese escort fighters, the sight was utterly devastating. Their radios crackled with disbelief and horror. Their protective formation lay broken and useless. The admiral of the combined fleet had fallen from the sky. The architect of Pearl Harbor was gone. Japan's naval pride had been extinguished in fire and smoke, yet aerial battle continued raging around them. Zeros clawed desperately at P-38s, seeking vengeance for their loss. Tracers streaked across morning sky in deadly patterns. Engines screamed through dives and climbs. One American plane spiraled downward, disappearing into the sea below. Others limped homeward with bullet holes punched through their wings. But the mission's core objective was complete. Yamamoto had been eliminated. The hunters had struck with lethal precision. The engagement lasted just over 20 minutes. 20 minutes that felt like an empire's collapse compressed into heartbeats. When surviving P-38s turned southward, fuel tanks nearly empty, their pilots carried history's weight with them. They had risked everything on precision timing, absolute secrecy, and single bursts of gunfire. Now below them, smoke still curled from jungle wreckage, a black monument to a life ended and a war forever changed. For Japan, the loss cut deeper than any battlefield defeat. For America, victory could not be publicly celebrated. Success had to remain cloaked in silence to protect the secret of broken enemy codes. For the men who pulled those triggers, it became a mission they would carry until their final days. In the aftermath's calm, the Pacific stretched endless once again. But its waters had fundamentally shifted. The war had turned upon a new axis. Dense bougainville jungle surrounded villagers who approached the wreckage with hesitant, fearful steps. The air reeked of aviation fuel and twisted aluminum. Smoke drifted between shattered trees. Among the debris lay the Betty bomber's broken shell. Within the charred remains, one body was discovered upright in its seat. Hands still rested near his ceremonial sword. The face appeared calm, frozen in final contemplation. It was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Even death seemed unable to disturb his composure. A soldier struck down while performing his duty. News of the crash spread like wildfire through Japanese military ranks. When confirmation reached Tokyo headquarters, disbelief swept through power corridors. The emperor himself received personal notification. For a nation built on discipline and unwavering loyalty, losing Yamamoto delivered a spiritual blow equal to any military defeat. Newspapers mourned him as a fallen hero, the man who had brought America to its knees at Pearl Harbor. But in classified briefings, commanders confronted harsh reality. They had lost their sharpest strategic mind, the only admiral who truly understood the enemy they faced. Immediate military consequences included widespread confusion. Command structures faltered without his guidance. Strategic plans faced indefinite delays. Officer confidence cracked under the pressure. The Imperial Navy attempted to mask the loss through careful propaganda. They announced Yamamoto's death, only after elaborate ceremonies could be arranged. He was presented as a martyr for the emperor's cause. Yet timing could not disguise the obvious truth. Japan's aura of invincibility had been permanently dimmed. Soldiers whispered among themselves that even great Yamamoto could be hunted down and killed. If he wasn't safe, who possibly could be? In America, reaction mixed triumph with necessary restraint. Pilots who returned from the mission received quiet congratulations, but public fanfare was forbidden. At the highest command levels, President Roosevelt and Admiral Nimitz insisted the operation remain absolutely secret. Official statements described the result as chance patrol encounters. The truth about U.S. cryptanalysts breaking Japan's JN-25 code had to stay hidden. Protecting that secret was worth more than any propaganda victory. Operation Vengeance's success could never be allowed to reveal the key to future intelligence victories. Among returning pilots, pride mingled with uncomfortable bitterness. Some celebrated their mission's precision, the skill that had carried them safely home. Others wrestled with deep moral unease. Dueling enemy pilots in fair combat was one thing. Targeting a single man with calculated assassination was another entirely. Years afterward, debates simmered over details. Who had fired the fatal burst that killed Yamamoto? Lanfear or Barber? Each man claimed the honor. Official records and eyewitness testimonies conflicted endlessly. Truth remained shrouded in controversy and competing claims. But for the men who squeezed those triggers, individual recognition mattered less than simple survival. They had completed their assigned duty. History could argue over specific details forever. The Japanese military, determined to preserve national morale, staged an elaborate state funeral ceremony. Yamamoto's cremated ashes returned to Tokyo, carried through streets lined with weeping citizens. Soldiers rendered crisp salutes. School children bowed respectfully. The propaganda machine painted him as immortal, a guiding spirit still protecting the fleet from beyond death. Yet beneath ceremonial pageantry, genuine despair lurked in official circles. With Yamamoto gone, Japan's naval leadership had lost its most cautious voice, its clearest strategic thinker. What remained was a chorus of officers far less willing to challenge reckless military ambitions. Strategically, Yamamoto's death accelerated Japan's inevitable decline. Already weakened by Guadalcanal and Midway disasters, the Navy now faced an uncertain future without its most experienced commander. For the United States, the psychological effect proved electrifying. Though they couldn't publicly trumpet their mission's success, leaders understood the victory's immense symbolic value. The man who had symbolized Japanese strength was dead, struck down in the skies by American hands. Proof that no enemy leader, however revered, remained beyond their reach. In following months, war rolled onward with unrelenting momentum. New battles erupted across the Solomons, across New Guinea, across the Central Pacific Theater. Japan continued fighting with characteristic ferocity, but shadows of doubt now clung to their forces like morning mist. Losing Yamamoto was more than losing one commander. It represented the fracture of an idea, the breaking of belief in manifest destiny. Operation Vengeance had accomplished what bombs and bullets alone could never achieve. It had pierced an empire's soul. Following Bougainville, Yamamoto's name refused to fade into history. Instead, it became legend across both sides of the Pacific conflict. For Japanese people, he was remembered as the admiral who dared challenge American might, who had delivered thunder at Pearl Harbor, who met his death while performing his sacred duty. His state funeral drew tens of thousands of mourners. a spectacular display of grief and national reverence. Yet even in mourning, silence surrounded the truth of his final hours. How broken codes and a handful of American pilots had altered a nation's destiny. For the United States, Operation Vengeance symbolized precision and unwavering resolve. Though cloaked in wartime secrecy, it stood as proof of what intelligence, planning, and courage could achieve together. The codebreakers who unlocked JN-25 remained hidden heroes for decades. Their contributions stayed obscured until classified documents were finally released. But within quiet command halls, military leaders understood perfectly. This was the moment when information became as powerful as steel, when secrets won battles as surely as naval guns. In the Pacific War's wider scope, Yamamoto's death carried weight far beyond any single battlefield. Japan lost not merely a commander, but its most pragmatic strategist, the man who understood America's industrial avalanche better than any of his contemporaries. Without his cautious voice, naval policy drifted toward increasing recklessness. Driven by men far less willing to question blind ambition, the empire fought onward, but the balance had fundamentally shifted. Defeat's shadow grew longer with each passing month. To historians studying the conflict, Operation Vengeance remains absolutely unique. It wasn't a battle for territory or strategic resources. It was a targeted strike against enemy leadership's heart. It raised enduring questions about morality and military necessity. Was Yamamoto's killing legitimate warfare or simple assassination? Was his death a true turning point or merely an accelerant of Japan's inevitable collapse? These debates continue today, but one truth stands above all arguments. When Yamamoto's plane fell from the sky, the myth of Japan's unshakable destiny fell with it. The story resonates beyond mere military history. It reminds us of power's inherent fragility, how even the most brilliant minds can be undone by secrecy's smallest cracks exposed. Yamamoto himself once warned that Japan's triumph would last only months before America's might overwhelmed them completely. In tragic symmetry, his own life followed that exact arc. 6 months of victory, followed by long descent into loss. Ending finally in fire above the Solomon Islands, Operation Vengeance endures because it captures modern warfare's essential paradox. Born from mathematics and codebooks, from machines and fuel calculations, from young men sent across oceans with orders they could barely question. Yet at its heart lay a single human life, taken in a moment of calculated violence, a life carrying with it an entire nation's hopes and one prophet's warnings. The lesson transcends weapons and victories. It speaks to fate's relentless currents. Wars are shaped not only by steel and fire, but by choices made in shadow, by secrets kept and revealed, by time's inexorable tide. Yamamoto's death reminds us that no leader, no empire, no dream exists beyond history's reaching hand. In the end, all human ambitions face the same judgment, the same reckoning with forces larger than any individual will. The Pacific War continued for 2 more years after that April morning. But something essential had changed in those 21 minutes above Bougainville. The balance of fear had shifted. The myth of invincibility lay shattered in jungle wreckage. From that moment forward, Japan fought knowing that even their greatest leaders could be hunted down and eliminated. America fought knowing their intelligence and precision could reach anywhere their enemies dared to fly. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where distance once meant safety, Operation Vengeance proved that nowhere was beyond the reach of determined hunters. The age of modern warfare had truly begun.